Thank you so much, First Lady Walls, and to Governor Tim Walz for proclaiming today, September 8th, is Minnesota Women's Suffrage Day, and to our Secretary of States, Steve Simon and Joe Grove. It is my pleasure to now introduce Minnesota Senator Carla Nelson and Minnesota Representative Dean Urdal, who have been big champions of civics education in our state. They will share a few words, and I would ask them to remain on stage to greet a few special guests we have with us here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today at one of our most important historic celebrations in our state history, Minnesota's Women's Suffrage Day. You know, it's difficult to imagine a time when half of Minnesotans were not allowed to vote. And thanks to the courage, the commitment, and bravery of the strong suffragettes, many of their descendants who are here today, women like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, today we have an inclusive republic where participation in our democracy is not defined by one's gender or race. That is worth clapping about. I stand here today at the Capitol because of women, mothers, like my mother who is here today, taught me that women are equal to men. Thank you, Mom. Great women like the late Senator Nancy Bradis, the first female senator ever to be elected in her own right to the Minnesota State Senate. Senator Nancy Bradis was my mentor and advisor and one of my predecessors, and I'm glad to say that ever since Senator Nancy Bradis came to the Minnesota State Senate, this Senate seat has been represented by a woman. I now serve in the Minnesota State Senate, and I'm the chair of the Education Policy and Finance Committee, and a former teacher, and all of the former teachers in this world can attest that we never give up an opportunity to educate. And so today, I just want to take you on a brief road trip. I want to take you on a road trip about the women's suffrage and the 19th Amendment. It was in, let me look at the date here. It was first in May 21 of 2019. It passed the U.S. House of Representatives. On June 4th, 1919, it was brought before the U.S. Senate, but it was not able to be voted on until after the Southern Democrats abandoned a filibuster. But at that time, it was passed 56 to 25. And then the race was on for states to ratify. And you've heard about Minnesota being the 15th state to ratify. I'd like to share with you just a little bit about that very last state. As you know, 3/4 of the states have to ratify. And by the summer of 2020, 35 states, including Minnesota, had ratified. But at that time, we needed 36 states. And it was all coming down to the state of Tennessee. That summer, we were one state short. Thousands of Americans flooded into Nashville, both pro and anti-women's suffrage. They were all trying to influence the outcome of the 19th Amendment. Those in support of women's suffrage wore yellow roses. Those opposed wore red. One of those wearing a red rose was Harry Byrne, a 24-year-old state representative from East Tennessee. He and his anti-suffrage allies had deadlocked the Tennessee House of Representatives, putting the 19th Amendment on the brink of failure. After weeks of intense lobbying, citizen pressure, and debate, the final vote appeared doomed. For the millions of Minnesota women fighting right to participate in our government. And yet there was one final lobbyist who contacted Representative Byrne to express her opinion, but she couldn't be in the Capitol, so she had to send a note. She sent in a note to Representative Byrne. This was probably the most important lobbyist in all of our lives, our mothers. It was his mother. Phoebe Byrne sent in a note. She's better known as Miss Phoebe. She sent a note into her son on the House floor on the morning of the vote. Here is what she said. Hurrah and vote for suffrage. Do not keep them in doubt. I noticed some of your speeches against. They were bitter. And I have been watching to see how you would stand. But I have not noticed anything yet. And in a final plea to her son, while paying tribute to Carrie Chapman Catt, the founder of the League of Women Voters, Miss Phoebe wrote, "Be a good boy and help Miss Catt put the rat in ratification." Representative Byrne could not ignore the advice of his mother, and while still clutching the note she had sent in, he cast that deciding vote, the final vote, which granted women the right to vote in the United States. The next day, Mr. Byrne explained his change of heart, standing and saying to his colleagues, "I know that a mother's advice is always safest for her boy to follow. And my mother wanted me to vote for ratification." This story underscores the importance of civic engagement. No matter who you are or what role you serve, whether you're writing a letter to your representative, or attending a rally, or simply casting your ballot, participating in our government is as important today as it was 100 years ago. And this is one of the reasons why I chief authored the Civics Education Bill in the Minnesota Senate. We're glad about that. Representative Urdal is the champion over in the House. Lastly, education citizenry is fundamental to a democracy. And our representative democracy is only as strong as its citizens. Individuals must have a working knowledge of our Constitution and government so that they can shape those government institutions and not merely be shaped by them. And in fact, when women achieved the right to vote in 1920, the League of Women Voters in Minnesota understood this, and they immediately launched civics schools across our state to help teach women how to participate in our democracy. And that educational fight continues today. A recent report shows that less than 30% of our students are proficient in civics, and a significant gap exists among racial and ethnic groups. So addressing this crisis of civics knowledge in Minnesota is a goal that we can and all should support, regardless of any party affiliations. We all do better when our government is influenced by the many diverse voices in our society. So I thank you for being here today, for your participation, and I encourage you all as you go home to your communities and families, encourage full participation in our government and in civics. And hurrah for the Minnesota Women's Suffrage Day. Thank you.
One of the good things about following people is that you don't have to say some of the things that they already said. As a former history teacher, I appreciate the history lesson that Senator Nelson just gave. As Senator Nelson indicated, we've had a crusade going in the Minnesota legislature about civics education and the importance for people to know and to learn and to understand how our government works, no matter race, gender, or anything else. And we have reached a little success. We have more to do in that area. But one of the groups that I worked with from the beginning with this is the League of Women Voters. They're very supportive, very helpful, and I appreciate the work that they have done and will continue to do. And with that, a little bit more history though. For the vote, the right to vote, momentum built in the 1910s under the leadership of Clara Urdal. Now I understand that some of her descendants are here. Are they? At the University of Minnesota in late 1914, Urdal debated women who were opposed to the suffrage movement. In her opening statement, Urdal argued, "One of the most impressive chapters in the development of the Anglo-Saxon man is his emergence from a state of bondage and serfdom to a position of freedom, and little by little to the attainment of self-government. Not less impressive is the emergence of woman from the state of ignorance and a position of dependence to the modern woman who is just now taking the last step in her development, the demand for political independence." The pages won't come apart. The Minnesota legislature, as has been noted, on September 8, 1919, ratified the amendment. The moment the Senate vote was polled, the corridors, floors, and galleries of both houses were in an uproar. Hundreds of women cheered and laughed and waved the suffrage colors, while in the rotunda, a band swung into the strains of the battle hymn of the Republic. In 1920, 8 women ran for the Minnesota House in Minnesota, 4-1. Today there are 46. We can be proud today of the role that Minnesota women played in gaining the right to vote. We can be proud that through organizations like the League of Women Voters, Minnesota women continued to emphasize the importance of the franchise and the need to be involved and to understand how our government works. The fruits of the great struggle for suffrage are the foundation of our system of government and must not be lost to apathy or failure to gain knowledge about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Nelson and Representative Urdal. We have some other special guests connected to our history. First of all, we had 2 wonderful young women who submitted and won awards for Minnesota History Day. Katrina Peters from Cretin-Durham Hall and Abigail Sikora from Linwood Monroe Arts Plus. Are either of you women thanks to the hard work of the Daughters of the American Revolution, a beautiful job of researching descendants and friends of the 25 women who are represented on the Minnesota Women's Suffrage Memorial. With us today we have the following family members. Please stand and wave when I call your names. The family of Fanny Fliegelman Brin, who was an activist for women's rights, Jewish welfare, and worker rights. With us are Judith Brin Huber, Nina Brin Heilstein, Aaron Brin, and Rabbi Deborah Brin. Ruth Stryker Gordon. And Ruth, we'll have you stand and then we'll have you speak in a minute. Yep, there's Ruth.
No.
Of Sarah Tarleton Colvin, who was a nurse, chair of the Minnesota chapter of the National Women's Party, and also arrested and participated in a hunger strike for women's suffrage. Edward Leaf, the great nephew of Julia Bullard Nelson, is back there from Red Wing, one of the Martha Ripley's over here. Nancy Wells Jewett, the great niece of Marguerite Wells, her family. I think there's others from the family here. Marguerite Wells went on to become the president of the National League of Women Voters as well. Mary Ames Mitchell, the great-granddaughter of Alice Ames Winter, who is also one of the founders of the Minneapolis Women's Club. Is that you back there? Oh, there you are. Okay, awesome, your family. That is so exciting. And here again for Maybeth Hurt Page, as you heard, one of the first 4 women elected to the Minnesota State Legislature in 1922, served until 1945 as her granddaughter, Dr. Mary H. Donald, and great-granddaughter and son, Amy Donald and J. Wiley Donald. We have a few guests here to share a minute on their wonderful women suffragists, but please continue to visit with family members down at the memorial in our Bring the Memorial Alive ceremony. If you've not seen the Suffrage Memorial, I trust the rain has stopped, the food trucks are great, and you should visit it and visit with the families. We have just a couple of people who I would like to say a bit about their relatives. Ruth Stryker Gordon is going to talk about Sarah Colvin.
Sarah Colvin and her husband never had any children, and instead they kind of adopted children of their friends. So we got to know her, and I thought of her as a third grandmother. In 1944, she wrote the book A Rebel in Thought, and in that book, it's an autobiography, but in that book she describes the horrors of going on food, refusing to eat, and also the conditions of the jails she was in. And in one case, in Washington, D.C., she was in jail with rats, and all the women were on a hunger strike at the same time. And I just don't think that anybody in this room would say they would like to do that again. I'd like to honor her greatly.
I understand we also have a representative from Fanny Wren's family. Yes?
Thank you. Our grandmother, Fanny Fliegelman Bryn, was born in Romania and came to Minneapolis as an infant. Fortunately, a high school teacher insisted that she go to college rather than become a secretary. Frances Squire Potter, a suffragist and professor at U of M, inspired Fanny, and she became inflamed with passion for women's rights. An avid debater and eloquent speaker, Fanny graduated from U of M in 1906. She married in 1913 and had 3 children. Balancing family life and her passion for women's rights, social justice, pacifism, and the Jewish community, her work as a suffragist launched her career as an activist. A gifted organizer, her leadership was impressive, inspiring, and influential. In 1934, Carrie Chapman Catt named her one of the 10 most influential women in the United States. A nationally recognized pacifist, she participated in the development of the United Nations and was present at its opening in 1945 in San Francisco. Upon her return to Minneapolis, 2,000 women crowded into the Nicollet Hotel to hear her tell all about it. Our grandmother died in 1961. We all grew up hearing of her amazing accomplishments and how she also helped to save Jewish refugees during World War II. 47 years after my grandmother's death, I was astonished to discover that as a congregational rabbi in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I was going to officiate at the bat mitzvah of the granddaughter of one of the women that my grandmother had sponsored and saved as a child refugee. If our grandmother were alive today, I believe that she would be using her brilliant mind and eloquence to inspire a new generation of people to work for everyone to have the right to vote. I believe she would be inspiring others to work for justice and to end the suffering we are inflicting on others. May her memory always be a blessing.
Bethard Page's family. She wanted to share a couple of words. It's so privileged to have them come from across the country. We have people who have flown here from Massachusetts and places.
That's a hard act to follow. In my grandmother's words, we cannot all be leaders or great pioneers, but we can do with determination and faithfulness the worthwhile things that we are fitted to do.
And one other very quick history lesson, the other thing Minnesota has the right to claim is to have the first vote after women got the right to vote in 1920 I will let Representative Claflin from South St. Paul tell us that short story.
I'll get out of your way.
Following the passage in the 19th Amendment, once that became the law of the land, South St. Paul featured the first election. And there were about 84 or 87, the records are a little unclear, women who voted on a water bond issue, voted for a water tower. And that bill did pass. But I'm very proud to have the opportunity to remind you that in just under a year, we will be celebrating that vote where the first women were able to vote under the 19th Amendment. And that was still not everyone able to vote. And by tying in this small piece of history from what happened in South St. Paul, we are linking to the current fight for other folks that are still trying to earn their right to vote.
Thank you so much. Again, please take time to be part of Madeline Hansen's wonderful Bring the Memorial live after this program. I'm now so thrilled to welcome to the stage our Minnesota Supreme Court Chief Justice, Lori Gilday. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon and welcome to the People's House as we gather to celebrate such a special day in the history of our democracy. My name is Lori Gilday, and since 2010 I've had the honor of serving as Minnesota's Chief Justice. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm humbled to share this stage with such an esteemed group of public officials and to stand before the families of the women who were so integral to Minnesota's suffrage movement. The women's suffrage movement has had such a deep and profound impact on our country, our politics, and our policies, and on our democracy. Such an impact that I couldn't possibly hope to pay full tribute in the few minutes that I have with you here today. But at the core of the suffrage movement was a powerful belief in equal justice and equal rights. These are principles that still have so much resonance with us today. It's been that continuous struggle for equal rights that has so defined our nation's history, as generation after generation has worked to tear down legal and societal barriers to equality. The women who we honor today, whose families are here with us commemorating this important date, played an outsized role in helping America achieve its founding promise. By fighting for this fundamental right for women, these trailblazers also helped to change society's notions about the role of women in public and private life. One of the women who spoke at the groundbreaking of the Minnesota Suffrage Memorial here on the Capitol grounds was Rosalie Wall. Rosalie, she was born just 4 years after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and she spent her life, as she said, quote, tired of sitting outside doors waiting for the men inside to make the decisions. At the age of 38, Rosalie enrolled at the William Mitchell School of Law, her first step towards a historic and influential legal career. She went on to be a public defender and a professor at William Mitchell, and then in 1977, she became the first woman to serve on the Minnesota Supreme Court. She spent her 17-year career on the court leading efforts to address both gender fairness and racial bias in our state's justice system. If there is one person who embodies the legacy of Minnesota's suffrage movement, it is Justice Rosalie Wall. Born in the wake of the suffrage movement, she picked up the torch and paved the way for another generation of women leaders. During her time on the bench in 1991, Minnesota made national history in becoming the first state with a majority of female members on its highest court. 7 years later, we have our first female Chief Justice, Kathleen Blass. And today, I'm proud to say that nearly half of the justices and judges in Minnesota are women, and we once again have a female majority on the Minnesota Supreme Court. Our state and our nation have been shaped by the legacy of the women's suffrage movement. As we gather today to reflect on the impact of the 19th Amendment, let us remember the determination, perseverance, and fearlessness of those who fought for its passage. Let us also consider the debt that we owe to their commitment to the ideal that all men and all women are created equal. Let us commemorate their legacy by reflecting on the incredible advancements our nation has made towards the goal of equal justice and equal rights. Most of all, let us commit ourselves to continue pursuing these founding principles of our nation in their honor and to strive every day to pass those ideals on to the next generation of leaders and trailblazers. Thank you for being here today to help us celebrate this great.
Judicial circuit also being such a powerful role in our democracy. Now, please join me in welcoming our wonderful Dr. Josie R. Johnson. And if you haven't read her new book, Hope in the Struggle, you better add it to your list. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. I feel deeply honored to be here celebrating the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters and the success of the 19th Amendment. The League, the Black community, Black women have had a long history of being involved with each other. As the history of the League is reviewed, we learn that leaders of the League of Women voter movement were heavily influenced by the attitude associated with the suffrage movement. We also know that the effort to learn the history of leadership and engagement has been one of great interest to all of our communities. The belief of fairness and justice, agreeing with the supporting white supremacists when it was politically expedient to do so. This betrayal of trust opened a rift between black and white feminists. The question of trust and the relationship between the African American and white liberal women became of great interest. Many black activists of the early 1920s, including Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, and Mary Church Terwell, had an opportunity to express their disappointment in having to explain an attitude that seemed to go against the wishes and belief system of justice and equality. I remember a conversation I had with a very good friend of mine many years ago as the women were organizing to create a feminist movement here in Minnesota. I shared with her that my activism was for black men and black women to be free and have the benefits of the struggle of black liberation. I became very involved with the League of Women Voters when my family and I moved to Minnesota in 1956. I learned about the struggle of our effort to be independent, to be fair, to be just in a society that needed to understand the suffrage movement and the struggle of all people to be free and equal. We worked on that for a long time here. I learned so much as a member of the League of Women Voters, coming from another state to Minnesota and having to learn the laws, policies, behaviors of Minnesota people. The League of Women Voters was my main source and offered the leadership that I needed. Many of you may remember Florence Gray, who was president of the Minneapolis League of Women Voters. You're all too young for that. And if you also remember Barbara Stuhler, who was a professor at the University of Minnesota, I will always feel indebted to Barbara. She was the one who nominated me for the National Board of the League. I have learned so much about the need for us to understand and to have our communities understand when we say our struggle is a people's struggle. It does not keep you from being engaged in the struggle of others, but what we must remember, we, all citizens, particularly African American citizens, is that it is the understanding of justice and freedom. It is the need to have open, honest discussions about freedom. It is important to know the struggle of the suffrage movement. It is important to know what the 19th Amendment did. And it's very important to remember the work of the League of Women voters in our community. The League was the sightseeing effort of struggling for a right, for justice, and for equality of all. So I wish all of us in this room and beyond will remember the struggle of a people as well as the struggle of a group. It's very important to us, the communities of color, that is clear, that it's understood, and it's not viewed as competition among people. I think we have been fortunate in many ways to gain freedom. For many, it will be a continuing struggle, and I think we know that well, to remain committed to justice and equality. I hope that we will not forget the moment of the women's effort, the struggle at a time when it was not pleasant or easy, and stay in touch with the current issues of justice in our society. I wish the League happy birthday. I wish us an understanding of what that means. And I hope that what we will have is a sense of freedom and justice for all people from this day forward. So I thank you very much.